Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar sponsored by RUCKUS Networks. Our speaker today is Bob LaLiberte, Senior Analyst and Practice Director at Enterprise Strategy Group. As you probably know, ESG is a highly influential industry analyst firm with practice areas that include networking and IT security. Bob's talk today will cover the topic, does your method for BYOD onboarding compromise network security? It incorporates research and insight from ESG that you're sure to find highly informative. My name is Vern Schwer, Senior Product Marketing Manager at RUCKUS Networks, and I'll also have some remarks at the end of Bob's presentation. But the main focus is Bob's take on today's topic, which will interest networking decision makers and anyone interested in IT security. There's a lot to cover, so without further delay, I will go ahead and hand it over to Bob LaLiberte.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Vern. I appreciate that. And I think, like you said, there's a lot to cover. So let's get started. And what I'd like to do is get started by looking at some ESG research and understanding how some of the higher level initiatives that we're tracking are impacting the IT environment and the wireless space as well. So if we go and look at this slide, this is from data that's been collected from our 2019 Technology Spending Intention Survey. And this was, it's important to understand the context, this was 600 IT decision makers that was spread across North America and Western Europe. Mostly, the majority of them enterprise, about 30% were mid-market customers. So the key takeaway is that the IT environment is evolving, and for a lot of you, it might be rapidly evolving, right? It's moving a lot faster than it ever has in the past. And so the interesting part around digital transformation, there's been a lot of hype about digital transformation for a lot of different years. But what the research shows us is that we're basically getting to a pretty close to an inflection point. ESG looks at technology adoption from a maturity model perspective, where typically about 20% of organizations are early adopters, the other 60% are following that, and then the last 20 are far more conservative. So when you look at these numbers for digital transformation, you can see that we're almost at that tipping point of all the early adopters having deployed and have mature digital transformation initiatives, but then very closely following behind that 60%, the vast majority of organizations really getting this started. So this is something that really you're going to see a lot more in your organization if you don't already. And it's important to recognize that this digital transformation, it's more than just technology, it's people, process, and that technology. And organizations are looking to digital transformation to help drive new efficiencies, maybe create new services, even new business models in some cases. But it's clearly something that's evolving. The other important takeaway from transformation isn't just the digital transformation, but the other one that's happening around the pendulum that was swinging towards consolidated and now is swinging back towards distributed. So organizations, after spending all this time and effort centralizing all their data centers and putting all their applications in there and putting a big moat up around those data centers to secure it, now have realized that things are starting to become more distributed. So not that they're going to be distributing data centers per se, but there's going to be some distributed computing, there's going to be direct internet access happening at the branch offices and so forth and other remote locations. So multiple different transformations that are occurring. Now, at the same time, we've been tracking IoT. And again, thinking about that maturity model perspective, IoT initiatives are a little bit further along. According to the research we have, 36% of these respondents said they currently have IoT initiatives underway, with an additional 41% in the next 12 to 24 months. So again, another big initiative that's going to be putting a strain on IT. And this is actually something that's also helping to drive some of that distributed compute. Because as organizations are deploying these sensors, the reason they're doing that is so that they're able to get that information in real time and make decisions, whether it's to improve customer experience, ensure the quality of a product, etc. That's driving a lot of this compute that's happening out at those remote locations. So it's critical that those devices are connected and can basically get their data to that remote location to get that analysis done in a timely manner. And this is happening, again, and how it relates to Wi-Fi is that a lot more of these IoT devices are becoming IP-enabled. And as that happens, you're starting to see more and more of the burden shift to the IT teams to have to be able to operate and protect those devices. The ultimate reality of all of this transformation and the evolution that's happening is resulting in your environment becoming far more complex. So this is clearly an area that organizations are responding to. As you can see in this survey, 66% of the people who responded, of the organizations that responded, said, yes, indeed, our IT is more complex than it was 2 years ago. And a lot of you on the phone may be thinking, yep, that's really not a shock to me. I'm living this. I understand it. And we don't ask the question just to clarify, is it more complex or not? But we then ask the follow-up question is, what's causing this complexity? And so as you can see in the data here, the top driver of this complexity, as they reported this year, was the increase in the number and type of endpoint devices. So that's really something, and you can think of that as both a combination of really IoT and also user devices that are being used to access applications on the corporate network. Interestingly, the number 2 was the data. So it's the sheer volume of data that's being transmitted. Again, you can see how IoT impacts that with more sensors collecting more data, driving it over potentially that Wi-Fi network and into the corporate network. There's going to be a lot more complexity. So what does all that mean to all of you? Well, ultimately, as you have a much larger attack surface across these distributed environments, you've got your data centers, you've got your remote locations, you've got cloud environments, you've got a lot of different users, BYOD, IoT devices, and ultimately what that means is that you're now trying to secure a much larger attack surface across these large and distributed environments. And the reality is that really, when you think about the new dial tone for business, it's really around Wi-Fi, and that Wi-Fi has replaced, or basically is the new dial tone for any modern business. As people come in, as they go to all these different locations, the one thing they're looking for is, how do I get on Wi-Fi so I can start and become productive? So that's really what we're starting to see. And the reality is, by distributing this attack surface, by distributing the environment, by opening up to get as many people on as possible, it's opened us up and organizations up to potential risks and threats. So I thought it would be interesting to maybe look at a few of these and see how that has impacted, the environment as a whole. So when I think about Wi-Fi and breaches, obviously the first one that comes to mind is the TJX data breach, where, they weren't really maybe using the best protection for their Wi-Fi, but it was a breach that highlighted the fact that attackers were getting more sophisticated and that they were going to leverage the Wi-Fi network in order to penetrate your organization and to be able to steal that personal information that so many of these organizations have. The next one that I wanted to highlight was around Target. And so Target was an interesting one. I think it was a HVAC system that maybe had the wrong level of privileges for an outside vendor that they were able to target and get on and get into. This one was really interesting to me, just outside of the technology breach per se, but also because this really changed the game from data breaches. Up until this point, a lot of times when there was a data breach or something like that, it was the problem of the CIO. And yes, heads would roll, but it usually stopped at the CIO. In this particular case, this really changed the game and opened up security because, in this case, the CEO lost their job, and now basically put every other CEO on notice that if there is some type of a breach or a hack, that ultimately the buck is going to stop at your desk and you're going to be the one responsible for it. And then the last one I wanted to bring up is around the casino fish tank, where you have organizations where someone had deployed an IoT device. In this case, it was a thermometer in a fish tank that ended up getting hacked. And what that ended up happening was, and this was just in their lobby, because they hadn't set up any separate networks or any kind of access control, that IoT device was connected to their corporate network and enabled the hackers to go in and get access to private information on some of their biggest customers. So again, what you're seeing is you've got all these different things reaching from just the Wi-Fi to HVAC, IoT type devices, and even fish tank thermometers in a casino lobby that are opening you up to potential risk and have threats of an impact to your business. So what I wanted to do is go back to the research and share with you the fact that organizations are what they're reporting for their cybersecurity investments. And the key takeaway from this slide is really the fact that they're distributed across a wide range of initiatives. And you can see there's things around network security, things around endpoint security and access management as well. It's highlighting that those are priorities. So this in and of itself is really to set up the question that I wanted to ask everyone that's attending is when you think about your cybersecurity investments and so forth, when was really the last time that you evaluated your secure network access process? When was the last time you took a good look at that and really evaluated how that was helping or hurting your business? You know, as I mentioned last time in a few slides ago, that Wi-Fi has become the new dial tone for business. So as you think about the fact that, you know, onboarding to your Wi-Fi is probably one of the most common practices that occurs every single day in every one of your locations. So your employees, your partners, contractors, guests, etc., even IoT devices potentially are getting on that Wi-Fi network, and they need that to be productive and help drive the business forward. They have to have that connectivity, but how secure is that connectivity? So, you know, you may be asking yourself, when was the last time you implemented a solution for this? And this is where it starts getting tricky because it may not be top of mind, but as you think about, is this going to be capable? If you think about digital transformation, et cetera, is it capable of handling demands of a modern environment? If you've implemented a BYOD strategy where you're having the employees buy and bring their own computer, you then lose control of what they do with that computer. And certainly when it leaves the office and it goes home. So you're setting yourself up for a lot of risk where organizations, you know, these employees, et cetera, contractors, even guests, you're at risk of them bringing some type of a virus or other malware back into the organization when they come in for the day, right? And with IoT and all these IP-enabled IoT devices, distributed locations, guest networks, et cetera, the key thing I think here is, you know, when you think about, when you lay down at night and go to sleep and you start thinking about this system, you know, does it make you nervous or are you confident that you've got everything covered? And lastly, again, the idea is where does it fall on your investment priority checklist? So, you know, thinking about how you answered just some of those last few questions, it may be something that maybe it's time that it moved up a little bit higher. And I wanted to go back to ESG research here as well to be able to show you that once you've made that decision and that you're going to be getting a new solution, I thought it would be helpful for you to understand how your peers are justifying their new IT purchases. So again, looking at the ESG research, these are the top justifications that are given to the business to justify IT purchases. So really no surprise that security is number one. Given all the breaches and things we just talked about, it's always going to be important to be able to improve your security posture and to demonstrate that your org, that it's going to be in a better position as a result of purchasing new technology. And then I think, you know, this was really interesting because, you know, when I told you about the Target breach and the CIO, CEO issue, it was interesting because I was at an event in New York City. It was a networking event. There was someone from a very large transportation company there in the security department. And they had just we were talking about the breach and when it happened. And he was confiding in me that, yes, he had had a number of proposals that had been stuck waiting for signature for a number of weeks, if not months. And how funny it was that the day after the breach was announced, that all of those purchases, all of those proposals got signed off and were ready to be ready for them to purchase. So it was interesting that on that day of the conference, the CEO announced his retirement for that. And I turned and asked him, what does that mean? And he said, well, it means tomorrow I'm going to go and put a whole bunch of new proposals in front of my CEO. And again, so thinking about that whole security posture is something that's absolutely at that CEO level. So, security, obviously, risk mitigation, extremely important. But don't forget about customer experience. also being extremely important. In fact, when we cut this by certain verticals, customer experience actually moves up to the number one spot over security in some organizations. So if you think about healthcare, think about potentially higher ed, things like that, where being able to provide a differentiated customer experience is really important. Same for retail, things of that nature. So you really want to be able to make sure that you're providing a good experience and making it easier to consume those Wi-Fi services. And keep in mind that customer experience doesn't just mean your company's customers. As being in IT, your customers are your fellow employees, are your executive team, et cetera, the contractors that work with you. Those are your customers. So ensuring that they have a positive customer experience is important. And then lastly, you can see the improving the business process. So I really look at this as being closely tied to digital transformation initiatives and how do we operate more efficiently. We've already established the fact that IT is going to become a lot more complex and a lot more difficult. So in order to have the same number of people manage these more distributed, more complex environments, we have to be able to improve our business processes to make it more efficient so that employees can do more with less. So ultimately, what you're looking for are solutions that are able to basically give back time to those in the IT staff and IT department. So this is also probably a good time to take a look, and we've talked about what does your existing solution do, but maybe a good time to go back and a minute or two to look at some of the issues you're probably facing with your current onboarding solution. So there's a lot of different ones, and I'll try and walk through them, but certainly the first one that I think about is the pre-shared keys. And I'm guessing a lot of you out there on the call right now, their company has this solutions. It's funny, the last time I was back in industries about 1.5 years ago, and the company I worked for, we did a lot of work with major telcos, and they had really serious security compliance for us, so much so that it was things like they would come and physically inspect to make sure none of our employees' monitors were facing an outside window so that someone could view in and see potentially information we had about them, et cetera. Yet, when you walked into the conference rooms and office, all over the place, you'd see Post-it notes with the passwords, right? And this is especially true for the guest networks. When you went into the customer meeting rooms and things like that, guest Wi-Fi were prominently featured everywhere. So, obviously this creates a potential risk if those passwords, those passkeys, are shared outside of the office. So whether that's a disgruntled employee, a contractor, a customer, et cetera, who could potentially pass that information on. Another area that's really a challenge for organizations is that lack of granular policies. So this is really the ability to how do you set up different policies for access amongst your contractors, your employees, even employees in different departments. Does everyone need access to everyone? This is basically about, potentially setting up kind of a zero trust environment. How can you ensure and implement policies that ensure that people only have access to what they're supposed to have access to? And so this is where, again, thinking about your existing solution, what level of support does your current system really have? Or are you just limited to, we have a corporate Wi-Fi network and we have a guest Wi-Fi network? And again, the problem there goes to with the BYOD, if someone breaches that mode, if they get in and they get on the corporate network, they have access potentially to everything. Unencrypted data, obviously a challenge in this day and age when you think about the ability for organizations to intercept that wireless data and so forth. So the ability to, encrypt that data is going to be far more important, across the board. So, certainly in all your locations and remote locations. The re-entry of the passkeys and passwords is definitely an issue. And I actually added this graphic over on the right-hand side to illustrate that point. In our research, our 2019 technology spending, in addition to those 600 technology decision makers, we actually also reached out to 200 business decision makers and asked a few questions about their perceptions of IT. And it was really interesting. We had a number of them, almost a quarter of them, of these business respondents said that IT was an inhibitor to their business. And when we asked them what was causing that, what was the problem behind that, you can see 38% responded that there were too many passwords to remember and manage. So if you think about the fact that, when you roll out a new system, or if you've got a Wi-Fi network, maybe with multiple vendors, et cetera, each which require their own passkeys, things like that, it may not seem like a lot to you, but to the business side, it's putting a huge burden on them, and it gets them frustrated and so forth. So just keep that in mind when you're thinking about that in your existing system. If you've got multiple passkeys for multiple locations, et cetera, it's really causing angst amongst the business decision makers, and you're probably hearing about it from your boss as well when that gets raised up at an executive level. Some of the other challenges that we see as well, think about just the lack of visibility that you might have. So you've created this environment, you've opened it up to all these people, devices, BYOD, but do you really have significant visibility so that when there's an issue or something, you can actually drill down and see where that problem is, where that problem's emanating from, and be able to react to it very quickly and be able to take a bad actor offline very quickly. And this has really implications when you think about it too, that ability to audit as well. So are you able to meet your regulatory governance compliance issues through your Wi-Fi infrastructure if you don't have any visibility into who's using it and what they're using it for? Okay. The other issue that you see with a lot of these legacy onboarding approaches is that because certainly of passwords and passkeys, things like that, that you tend to get a lot of support desk inquiries. So this isn't going to be great, especially if we just talked about the fact that as organizations are dealing with this more complex environment, they need to be more productive. But how can you become more productive if you're spending most of your time responding to trouble ticket issues all day from people in the organization, new contractors, new employees, guests potentially trying to get onto the network, and they're not able to? And ultimately, when you think about these challenges combined, what it ends up resulting in is really poor user satisfaction and a poor experience. And as you know, when users are frustrated, it's not that they're just filing tickets, but they're also busy complaining around the water cooler and complaining up the chain of command that they're less productive because they can't get onto the Wi-Fi or they're having problems with the Wi-Fi, which ultimately impacts your business. So what are some of the key questions you should be asking yourself in this environment? Maybe a few things like, are you guys still using a pre-shared key model or MAC authentication for onboarding? And how long ago was it implemented? What level of protection does it actually provide? I think a really key question for everyone to ask and think about is, what's the impact if the network gets hacked? So, for example, when was the last time you did a business impact assessment to determine what would happen to the business if your Wi-Fi got hacked? What was the cost? What's the reputation? And as we mentioned earlier, careers are at stake here, and in many cases, it could lead up to and include the CEO. A real quick and easy one that you can do is simply pull the logs and find out how much time your support team is spent troubleshooting network issues. So I think you can use this information and you combine that with the impact analysis. It can really help you justify upgrading to a new solution. And then, another good idea is to go out and talk to your actual end users, your customers, and ask them about their experience. And not just how is it when you're sitting at your desk, but what is it when you're moving about the business, around the building, and when you're moving into different rooms, or if you have a campus across the campus, asking them how it can be improved. Maybe, what do they think of the current model for onboarding, right? Does it provide a good experience for them? Does it provide a good experience for the guests when they're bringing them in? So there's a lot of different things you can do to go out and help with that justification process, but it really starts with, I think, asking a few simple questions. And we've already talked substantially and at length about the fact that everything in IT is changing. So you need to assess what are the potential risks of not changing. As you have that increased attack surface and the attacks are getting more aggressive, can you afford to leave a known vulnerability in place? And lastly, do you understand the risks of having insufficient security measures around network access, especially again with that increased BYOD devices and the potential tsunami of these IP-enabled IoT devices that are going to come as these IoT initiatives mature and scale in size. So, given all of that, what is it that ESG would recommend for security in your environment? If you think about, again, those top three: security, customer experience, and improving productivity, what would we recommend doing? Well, one of the first things, again, given all the BYOD, et cetera, certainly performing some type of a health check on the devices that you're bringing into your environment is going to be a good idea. So the idea there is you want to have some level of security on a device level that you're not going to onboard an infected device. When you think about the ransomware, malware activities, things like that, the last thing you want to do is let that through and get into your environment. And ideally, this might involve having something like a dissolving agent or something like that, so you're not having a ton of overhead in these devices, but it provides that at least that minimum level of security when you're onboarding a device. The next thing is to ensure that you've got some type of role-based security. So again, this is that zero trust concept of, making sure that the right people have access to only what they need based on either their role, their department, maybe it's even based on the type of device, etc. So it's only getting access to what's appropriate for them. And a great way to eliminate a lot of the passkey issues is to ensure that you're leveraging digital certificates. So that way you're able to authenticate users and connect them to any legitimate access point via their digital certificate. And then also, that's big in that it's not going to enable any attackers to get access if they maliciously were able to obtain one of the pre-shared keys, either from a disgruntled employee or potentially even from a guest or a contractor who was working there. And then lastly, you really need to have the ability in this day and age, right? It's not a question a lot of times of if we'll get hacked, it's a matter of when. And so your ability to respond to that issue and shut it down is really important. So having that ability to really quickly ID any user or device that's causing an anomaly and be able to shut that down and quarantine it is going to be critical for these new modern environments. Additionally, it just makes sense now that you would encrypt any of the traffic that you're sending over your Wi-Fi network. Organizations are encrypting data at rest. It's obviously encrypted in the data center a lot of times at rest as well. So the last area across the WAN, it's being encrypted. So you want to be able to encrypt your data in transit over the Wi-Fi as well, and using whatever the latest, the WPA2 or even WPA3, as that becomes mainstream, to be able to do that and really help to mitigate the risk of anyone intercepting that traffic. Another area of concern that organizations should address is the ability to, integrate this system into your existing ecosystem. So the reality is everything, right? It's not about, there's no single solution. So providing the appropriate levels of security is all about defense and depth. So the ability to leverage APIs to tie into third-party security solutions and leverage that so you have got a greater visibility across the entire environment is going to be important. And lastly, for security, finding alternative methods for your secure onboarding. Like I said, I think ideally you would leverage digital certificates, but if you can't do that, and there's going to be lots of times when it doesn't make sense, right? So IP-enabled IoT devices probably, not going to be able to accept a certificate, and you're not going to have guests and potentially short-term contractors install a certificate as well. So you'd really want to look for solutions that give you that option to leverage something other than just the pre-shared, maybe dynamic keys, things like that, that can provide similar security benefits, but are very temporal and are not going to extend any risk to your organization after they're no longer needed. When you think about the better experience, really a couple of things that you need to do here, with everyone coming in, millennials adding into the workforce, et cetera, that whole experience that they have is really around the devices that they're currently using. So when you think about that, it's their mobile phone, et cetera, where they plug in a SIM card and then wherever there's network access, they get it. And so that's something that you really need to think about emulating into your environment. So that self-service concept of I add my certificate and then I don't have to think about it anymore. I can connect to anywhere in the business that I need to be connected because I've got this. And this extends to not just going into their office every day, but anywhere they are across the business environment. So it's not just about the self-service, it's also about them having a similar experience regardless of where they are in the corporate network. So anywhere along those campus that they've got the ability, whether it's in, for higher ed, it might be going across from a dorm to classrooms, et cetera, that they're not having to change their passkey to access a printer that's in the library versus one that's in their dorm, et cetera, things of that nature. And they don't really care whether the AP is from one vendor or another. All they want to know is that they can get access and they can connect to the applications that they want to. So these are two areas I think that are really critical to ensuring that organizations are delivering a better customer experience to their users. And then lastly, I think when you look at the improved process and productivity, this is an area where, again, especially those organizations looking at the digital transformation process, how do we improve our onboarding process? How do we improve our IT staff productivity? So again, leveraging digital certificates is certainly one of those areas. And because that enables organizations to really reduce the number of trouble tickets and the number of hours that IT staff spend on fixing trivial problems instead of focusing on the architecture and strategic investments. So again, it may sound like a small thing, but really when you think about how many people you have, how many issues they have around this, again, going back to those questions, if you can find out how many tickets are being generated just around this that you could eliminate, could provide and could yield a tremendous benefit to your organization. Next area is around centralized, automated role-based access policies. So anytime you can just create those policies and have them automatically deployed, again, means the users access once and they get access to everything that they need to. So this is really somewhere where, again, you can gain tremendous amount of productivity just by automating those policies. And then the granular visibility down to the user and device level is absolutely required. Again, as I mentioned, in order to reduce the time spent troubleshooting and to rapidly map any suspicious devices to a user and then be able to immediately mitigate that and take corrective action is going to be really critical for an organization. And in some cases, that granular visibility, right, might come down to even the health check, where the device never even makes it onto the network to begin with. So I know that we've covered a lot of ground, but I think when you think about these solutions, what you're really trying to do is deploy these secure access solutions that provide the connectivity and the experience that your users demand and the security that your organization expects you to do that. So I think this is really about, Wi-Fi, as I mentioned, really has become the new dial tone, but you need to be able to deploy it securely and ensure that your customers have the appropriate levels of connectivity to all the applications they need, but then ultimately it's delivering that great experience that enables them to be more productive and help drive your business forward. So I really appreciate your time and attention during this webinar. If you would like additional information, there is a white paper on this topic that you can read up on, and you can see the links to that paper at the top of this slide. So feel free to do that. And I'm now going to turn it back over to Vern. Thank you very much, everyone.
Okay, great. Thanks, Bob, for that insightful presentation. This really raises awareness I think, around an underestimated potential attack surface in enterprise IT environments. And next, I'm going to wrap up the session today with about 10 minutes or so of presentation material on how RUCKUS Networks can help address some of these issues that Bob raised. Let's go ahead and dive into that. Secure network access for BYOD, guest users, and IT-owned devices is the subject matter of the RUCKUS portion of the presentation today. Let's begin by establishing some context about the domain area in which we're talking about here within the IT security realm, and it's network access security for BYOD and guest users. Or if you want to flip that phrase on its head, secure network access for BYOD and guests. BYOD users being, of course, internal stakeholders who bring their devices into the environment. Could be a tablet, an employee laptop, or a smartphone, and they expect easy and simple connectivity. And guest users who have a shorter term affiliation with your organization arrive with the same expectation. Partners, suppliers, anybody who has a reason to be in your IT environment is going to expect connectivity to be easy and intuitive for them and to not have to worry about that. And to be productive and a productive partner with your organization, they're going to need that connectivity in order to do business. And for neither of these categories of users may security be top of mind, but certainly for IT teams, it is. You want to make sure that they're able to connect securely in a way that is consistent with data and network security in your environment. Also, another use case is IT-owned devices as well, connectivity for IT-owned devices. But in the product category that we're talking about here, usually it's BYOD and guest users that drive adoption of this product category of network access security or secure network access. And I should mention also that for IT-owned devices, IP-enabled IoT is also in the mix as well. So BYOD, guest users, and IT-owned devices getting network access in a secure fashion. What are some of the challenges around this? And this maps pretty closely to what Bob was discussing earlier in the presentation. The first challenge is user experience around network onboarding and authentication. And just to reiterate, onboarding is the process by which a device gains access to the network for the first time. A user gains access for the first time with a new device. And it's a process by which they gain that connectivity that they need, but a lot of times it's an unintuitive onboarding process can hamper user experience, as well as, with pre-shared keys, there may be multiple SSIDs that they need to associate with as they move about the environment. Imagine in a higher education setting, for example, where you may have a different SSID at the dorm or the cafeteria, the lecture hall, or the library, and each one of those comes with a different pre-shared key or Wi-Fi password, and students may bring multiple devices into that environment, and when the pre-shared key changes, they have no way of knowing. So what happens is that creates a discontinuity in the connectivity experience for the student or any stakeholder really within the institution in a way that manifests as a help desk ticket. So the adverse user experience around connectivity and gaining network access manifests as help desk tickets for IT, which creates a lot of headaches. In fact, it's well known that one of the leading help desk tickets, sources of help desk tickets in enterprise IT environments has to do with connectivity for users trying to connect their devices to the network. So there are a lot of issues both from a user experience perspective and an IT help desk perspective, an IT productivity perspective associated with this notion of secure network access for BYOD and guests. There are also myriad security problems with the default methods of network onboarding and authentication. Typically, those are MAC authentication and conventional PSKs. And in the case of MAC authentication, for example, data in transit over the wireless, over the air between the wireless access point and the device is not encrypted, and so it's subject to being spied upon by prying eyes, shall we say. In the case of a pre-shared key model, then users are able to share that key with others who may have no business being on the network because everybody uses the same key to access the network. They can also walk out the door with that when they're no longer an employee of the organization, for example, and they walk out the door with the same level of access privileges as they had when they were an employee. Clearly, that's a security risk, as is the inability to, with default methods of network onboarding and authentication to enforce policies for different levels of access or differentiated levels of access based upon who the individual and the relationship is to the organization. And lastly, just the inability with default methods of network onboarding and authentication to associate a specific user with a specific device, and the lack of visibility control over devices on the network. You can't control what you don't see. So clearly that's a security threat when you don't even know who's on the network. And you really also don't have, with these default methods, the ability to reach in and revoke access on a granular level if somebody is discovered to be using the network access that you provided inappropriately, or if they leave the organization. You want to be able to reach in a pinpoint fashion and revoke that access. You need to have that control in order to ensure a secure environment. So you may not be surprised to learn that we actually have a product offering that addresses these concerns around user experience, IT experience, and security. And that product is Cloud Path Enrollment System. And Cloud Path Enrollment System is software as a service, your choice, that delivers secure network access for any user in any device on any network. You do have a choice to deploy either on-premises in a virtualized environment, or you can use it as a SaaS offering hosted by RUCKUS in the cloud. And it works with any device that a user is likely to bring into your environment, whether it's an employee laptop, a tablet, or a smartphone. And it supports both BYOD and guest users, as well as IT-owned devices. And very importantly, when we say any network, we mean that it's entirely network agnostic. This platform for secure onboarding. It's network agnostic, meaning that it works with other people's infrastructure. We have a lot of customers who have RUCKUS infrastructure, wired and wireless, who use Cloud Path Enrollment System. We also have many customers who use other vendors' systems or wireless and wired network infrastructure. And the key thing around that is you don't have to be in a refresh cycle for your infrastructure to roll out this system for getting users online quickly and easily and securely. So Cloud Path Enrollment System is our offering in this area. Let's drill down a little bit on the security functionality associated with Cloud Path Enrollment System, what we bring to the table here in terms of security. And the first element is encryption for data in transit over the air between the access point and the device. And you recall that this is one of the failures of Mac authentication, but we shore up that security hole. We plug that hole up with WPA2 enterprise powered encryption. That's the highest standard that's in broad use today. And soon WPA3 will be in the mix as well. That's been announced by the Wi-Fi Alliance. So beyond encryption, we also have authentication, network authentication based upon digital certificates. So you're able to make sure that only approved users are able to gain access to the network, and unapproved users, or people who shouldn't be on there, aren't on the network. And so digital certificates in the system for managing that is a key security feature as well. And users should only be able to have access to the resources on the network that are in keeping with their role in the organization. And for that, Cloud Path Enrollment System has role-based policy capabilities. So you're able to provide policy-based access that gives them only the right level of access based upon who they are or with the relationship to the organization. Guest users, for example, typically are only granted internet access only. That would be an example, whereas internal users who have a need to know have higher levels of access to network resources. Cloud Path Enrollment System also helps you to ensure that devices are safe before they connect with an upfront posture check to make sure baseline security measures are in place. And we're talking about things here like a PIN code that's enabled on a device in case it's lost and stolen or something, for example, or the firewall enabled on an employee laptop, anti-malware software with current signatures installed on an employee laptop before they're allowed to connect, so you really reduce the risk that an insecure device is going to be allowed to connect to your network, lowering the risk that you see from these BYOD and guest devices. And lastly, we give you the basis to increase your control and visibility over devices on the network. You get the ability to associate every user with a device and the ability to revoke access at any time. So that visibility lets you revoke access when an employee leaves the organization. for example. So in the same way you want to turn off their email access, you want to turn off their network access as well. So that visibility and control and ability for revocation of network access is key for the security posture as well. Now let's look at the other side of the value that's provided by a cloud path enrollment system, and this is really two sides of the same coin. Employee self-service in terms of the onboarding process, the means by which users get connected for the first time, manifests as better user experience, but it also results in better experience for IT, because employee self-service means that IT doesn't have to get involved in the onboarding process. I think we're all end users ourselves, of course, as well as being in the IT industry. But as end users, I think we're conditioned in a variety of circumstances to be, conditioned for self-service, shall we say. So this is something that end users in your environment will really take to, because when they try to onboard their device onto the network for the first time, they go through an intuitive workflow that you have the ability to customize for them based upon what type of user they are. For internal users, for example, would use their existing Active Directory credentials to log onto the network on day one. Visitors would go through a slightly different workflow, but similar in a way that's also very intuitive on day one. And then on day two, they connect automatically in a process that's entirely transparent to them. So they don't have to go through an onboarding process again and again. It's a one-time only thing. And IT doesn't have to get involved, which is really a great thing, because user is happy. You see a happy user here. IT is equally happy because they don't have to do any manual intervention to get that user connected. And then they're also, they're also secured by those security features we reviewed in the previous slide. And so the benefits of Cloud Path Enrollment System is that it increases security for users, devices, data, and the network. It streamlines that network onboarding process so that users are happy and they don't have to worry about it after the initial onboarding process, both BYOD and guest users. And thereby, by streamlining that process, it reduces the burden on IT. And remember, you probably experienced this as well. Network access issues are a big driver of help desk tickets for most IT departments, in lacking such a system as Cloud Path Enrollment System for smoothing that process. So those are the benefits of Cloud Path Enrollment System. I want to, as we near the end of the presentation, I do want to share a customer quote. We have many hundreds of satisfied customers with the Cloud Path Enrollment System, and one of them is Forest Hills Public Schools in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And we have a quote here from Chris Olliger, who's a systems engineer there, and he says, CloudPath gives us an easy way to attach devices to our wireless network securely without manual intervention from IT. So you see the story that I just told about easier onboarding and easier connectivity for end users and lower overhead for IT really does play out in customer environments as well. And we actually have a case study, a written case study, and a video as well on this particular satisfied customer that you might want to explore, which is a great segue into the next slide, which has to do with where to go to learn more, to discover more information about Cloud Path Enrollment System. And the URL you see here, ruckusnetworks.com/secure access, will take you to the product page, which hosts a wide variety of assets, different pieces of informational material that will help you to learn more about the product and also about the need for this product category. Quite a few of these materials are really just about establishing the fact that there are these security holes out there and user experience issues that you can improve upon in a way that improves user experience as well as enhances security. So just establishing the need for a category in this particular a product in this particular category. We have a product overview video, a PDF version of the white paper from ESG that Bob referenced a little while ago, customer case studies, and just really a wealth of assets to help you learn more about secure network access and about Cloud Path Enrollment System as a way to address that need within your organization. And that actually is going to end our presentation material today. Thank you for joining us. That is the RUCKUS portion of the presentation. Since this webinar is offered on demand only, we won't be fielding any live questions. But if you do have any questions, I invite you to contact me at the email address shown here. I also invite you to follow me and RUCKUS Networks on Twitter. And lastly, I'll say thanks again to Bob for a great presentation, and of course to all of you for listening in.